Hey Victoria, thanks for coming on the Teacher's Point of View podcast. Obviously, you've had a remarkable journey so far, and I mean, I say this every time somebody comes on my podcast, but I mean, some of the people that I've had, I just can't believe that you've chosen to come on, really. So yeah, thank you for coming on. Let's just start off with a little bit about you. Like, can you just kind of introduce yourself and talk to us, sort of what got you into teaching and like your progression in teaching and how you've got to head teacher, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've spoken publicly about this a couple of times. I've obviously done a TEDx talk and talked about my childhood. I come from a very deprived area in Liverpool, and when I went to school, the teachers there and the head teacher there, they were like my saving grace. They had such an influence on my life, and they made me feel safe and unwanted, and they guided me through an awful lot of difficult times. And so I guess inevitably I was always going to have something there about teaching, but I fell into teaching really when I was 18, simply because I couldn't decide whether I should join the RAF as a Chinook pilot or if I should go to university and do something different and get a degree, do the standard kind of expected thing that in my school that was the kind of standard expected thing. So yeah, I've spoken about this a few times and people probably be bored of hearing about it, but I fell into teaching by chance. I don't regret it, not one bit, because I've had the best 25 years, I think, as a result of training to become a teacher, because teaching is a skill that you can take with you all over the world, which I have done. So I've taught everywhere that I wanted to teach. It's never held me back. In fact, it's given me a lot of opportunity. So I trained in a college called Charlotte Mason College, which is in Ambleside in the Lake District, and I did a degree in environmental science and outdoor education. So that afforded me the opportunity to be in the outdoors and to develop a kind of love for being outside and to see how that has such an impact on people's mental health, and also working with children in the outdoors, because again, inevitably, when I was doing my teaching practice, I took a lot of the skills that we were learning in my degree course into school, and just found that, you know, children really benefited from it, no matter the context. And for some reason, I was always put into quite challenging school circumstances, even on teaching practice. I don't know that they would do that nowadays. Perhaps they would, I don't know. But I was in some quite challenging environments, and I always found that children responded really well. So I really enjoyed my teaching training, and then I moved on. I taught in Newcastle upon Tyne, in a fantastic school for a wonderful head teacher, probably what people would call now old school. So we had these strict ideas about how women should come to school as role models for young women, and that we should always be smartly turned out, and that we should wear, you know, again, this will be a contentious issue, but this was his philosophy at the time, that we should wear sort of skirt suits and look smart so that the girls in this area in Newcastle upon Tyne could look up to us and think, you know, I want to be smart and whatever. And I took a lot from him, actually. He ran his school very shrewdly, but a caring man. Mr. Todd, I don't know if he's still around or not, but he was my first head teacher boss, and I took a lot from him. And then I moved to Kenya, and I ran a school there, prep school, that was set up for the children of farmers, expatriate farmers who were growing vegetables and fruit for companies like Marks and Spencer and Waitrose and Tesco and things. And then my sister got sick and she got cancer, and I came home to look after her for a little bit. And I got another job in Northumberland, which was a promoted post, which I really enjoyed doing. And I ended up being a leading English teacher across Northumberland. Don't ask me how I ended up doing English, because obviously my passion was in outdoors and sports, but I did end up being an English practitioner, a leading teacher, loved it. And then I got married to my husband, ex-husband, and off we went to Germany, and I taught in an army school in Germany, and I also taught soldiers in the education centre, alongside which I had a couple of kids and did my first master's. So that was quite a challenging few years, but interesting nevertheless. And then I came back and was a deputy head in a church school. I don't actually have a practice, but I really did enjoy working in that school. Again, I learned an awful lot. And then I got my first headship in a very challenging area, really challenging area. And I worked a lot with diversity in terms of traveller and Gypsy Romani children. So I was there for 6 years, and then the Director of Education sent out a plea for some help with a school that was in a very challenging situation, and a few of us answered the call, and I was asked to go and kind of help this school out. And in fact, I ended up working there permanently, which is where I am now, 2 years later. A little bit worse for wear, a bit tired and a bit sort of ragged around the edges, but I couldn't be happier, and I absolutely love my current school. Not that I haven't loved all my others, but I feel like I finally found my forever home, and I'm really happy. So yeah, that's my story. Boring as it is, that's my story.
No, I mean, you've obviously had quite a fruitful career, haven't you? I mean, you went to Kenya, you went to Germany, you've kind of done it all. You were like head of English, even though like you specialise in outdoors. It's quite remarkable actually, because I don't know if you follow Gavin McCormack on LinkedIn, but he basically runs Montessori schools, and he's
actually, yeah, I do, yeah.
And he promotes outdoors as a really good way to interact with children and get the best out of children. I think he does primary as well, doesn't he? And it's really interesting you say that. But obviously, my dad is actually from Kenya, so I mean,
wow!
I know. So it's interesting that you went out there and you went to Germany. What do you think that did for you in your career? Like, kind of going to different like countries and gaining experience out there.
I think, well, firstly, any experience you can get of different cultures, I think, is enriching for you as a person. I did a lot of work with the local schools as well whilst I was there. And in fact, I worked with a guy from Newcastle University who brought students out, and they kind of improved the outcomes for some of the local children. And obviously, that's a really rewarding thing to be a part of. But what I would say is that traveling around the world for the last 25 years has made me see that there is no one linear way of progressing in teaching as a career. If you want to progress, just doing things that are slightly different or taking every opportunity that comes your way is not going to hinder you in your career. In fact, about 8-9 months ago, we had a student teacher who was in the staff room. I was making a cup of tea, and she was asking me, so tell me, did you always want to be a head teacher? And I said, no, I didn't really. In fact, I sometimes look behind me and think, how did I end up here? But and she said, what did you do? And I kind of gave her a potted history like I've just given you. And she said, wow, did you never worry that, by going to Kenya and taking yourself out of the English system, that you'd never get back in? Or, when I was in Germany, I was applying for deputy heads jobs here, and it didn't stop me from being interviewed. In fact, what I'd say, and now that I do a lot of recruitment, perhaps like you do, I would say when I'm looking at someone's CV, I find it fascinating what they could possibly bring to my school that's different, slightly different from the norm. That could just be me and how my brain is wired. But I guess it obviously was people before me who employed me thinking, well, she's interesting. She's not following the normal path, because all the people who came here to be a deputy head when I have got my deputy headship back in England all followed a very linear path of, they became subject leaders, so they became head of geography or a leading teacher in maths for the authority. And because they were seconded out and they did this work across all these schools, the natural progression for them was to go back into school after their secondment in a leadership role. I didn't have that at all. I just had the fact I'd done a master's degree. I had been teaching abroad in Germany, all ages, soldiers, their dependents from everywhere from Fiji to Kenya to England. And that's all I had. I didn't have anything special to offer, just a normal teaching career and then a few extras on the side. And that obviously got me the job. So I would say to anybody who was thinking, should I, shouldn't I, definitely do it, because you only live your life once. And if there's an opportunity in front of you, I think take that opportunity with both hands. And the only thing I would say is everything that you do it at 100%. Never ever give 50% or 20%. Everything you do should be 100%, so that every experience you have is enriching, not just to you, but to the people that you're working alongside and with.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, I think it's very interesting you say that about sort of gaining experience abroad. Obviously, I've been doing recruitment with secondary schools mainly for the last 6 years, and often what I find is when I'm sending a CV to a school and it's of a candidate that's kind of been abroad for a couple of years, what schools sometimes, well, a lot of times say to me is, well, they're not going to necessarily know the British curriculum, like the teachers that are experienced in the UK. And I think it's always one of the biggest challenges and obstacles I have trying to find people roles. Why do you think people are still in that mentality that like they can't adapt quickly to the British curriculum?
I don't know if I'm a bit controversial probably about this. I don't know if I'm quite the person to answer this, but what I will say is this: I don't look at teaching to be solely based on the curriculum and the sort of the bite-sized chunks that you have to teach children. For me, what I'm interested in is somebody who, and in a way that can be quite challenging if you just got a CV, which is why I always like to meet people, but I'm interested in people, who like children. I think whether you've taught for 6 years or 10 years in Kenya or Dubai or Wales or whatever, if you love children and you're passionate about your job, I could put anything in front of you, you could pick it up and you could make it your own and engage children and teach from it. So whether that's the English curriculum or the International Baccalaureate or the Welsh curriculum, to me, they're just the bite-sized pieces that you have to teach children because the government say so. And anybody could do that. But if you can do that with passion and flair and really get children to buy into you, that is a skill that you can't find on a piece of paper, or that's a level of investment in children's futures that is difficult to quantify. So why do I think people still think that it's hard to adapt? I think maybe because maybe that's how they could be. I know it's easy to adapt because I've done it, and I know that what the core thing that I have is that I'm passionate about children. So whether I'm a teacher or a head teacher, or no matter what school I've been in, my passion has been in that school at that time with those children, and I've given it 100%. So I think because I've adapted myself, I think it's possible for anyone to do.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, working hard is an element of working hard, isn't there? But I've also seen teachers that work really hard that don't often progress in their career, And what do you think it is about certain teachers that kind of it gives them a limit of where they can progress to, or what do you think like the biggest flaw in teachers is for why they don't make it to the next level?
Gosh, I think it's probably, I don't know, there's a percentage either way, but I think part of it is the environment in which they work. So I don't particularly want my teachers to play safe and do everything by the book and spend all their time writing things down or checking things or producing documentation for anyone. I prefer my teachers to spend their time investing in actual children and giving them the verbal feedback and celebrating what they do and improving their self-esteem and that kind of thing. So I think if you were to come to my school and ask the teachers there, they'd say that we don't play safe. We look to the next day for that child, for that group of children, and what they've experienced that day and how it can be built upon. And I think the culture in which you work is key, probably. I mean, not everybody is going to be a leader. Not everybody wants to be a leader, and I think that's absolutely fine. People have got all kinds of skills that they bring to the table, and it's about harnessing all of those skills and finding ways to engage staff in ways that keeps them teaching and keeps them enlivened and working with you. That's what I see one of my key roles as a head teacher doing, and I love doing it. But not everyone's going to be a leader, but if they want to be a leader, then they have to be given the breathing space to show that they can do it. And if your school is so structured and so confined and limited to government expectations, or this phrase of what Ofsted will expect or what Ofsted wants, people can become too hung up on that. So the culture and the outside of what's happening to that staff member can influence them, but also the staff member themselves. If they don't particularly want to be a leader and they want to continue working with children in a classroom, then there are other things that they can do. For example, we've got a guy working with us at the moment. He's got a young family. He says, I'm not interested in leadership. And I said, how about you lead on this program that we've got in school? We spent a year planning for it, getting it all set up. Everyone's had the training and it's ready to launch. Why don't you do that? It's right up your street. It's about physical development. It's outside. It's about fun. And he was absolutely delighted, and it's given him a new lease of life. And he said, it's enabled me to improve my presenting skills to there's about 90 staff in our school. So he says there's to improve my presenting skills, and I go around and see the infant children as well as the year 6 children. And it's actually really excited. And he's got a new lease of life because it's given him that energy and that renewed passion for what he was doing really well anyway, but without giving him any additional responsibility in terms of leadership.
Yeah. Very fantastic. Like, what do you think your biggest difficulties or your biggest challenges were when you became a head teacher?
My biggest difficulties when I became a head? Well, I actually wrote my doctoral thesis about this, so I do actually know what it is. If I'm honest, it's about the feeling of isolation. So when you become a head, I think a lot of people look at you and expect you to know all the answers, and to be all things to all people all the time and be wonderful at it and never make a mistake. And sometimes people can put that pressure on themselves as well, like, oh my gosh, I don't. I'm happy to say to parents if I've made a mistake, and it's not a nice process to go through, but what else can you do other than say, yeah, I made a mistake there, sorry about that. Or if you've inherited some bad decisions and some bad outcomes, then you have got to have that level of self-belief where you can say, to look someone in the eye and say, look, this happened before, I can only apologize for it, let's find a way forward. So I think the first thing is that feeling of isolation. There is only you who's responsible for decisions, but very quickly you learn, or I learned anyway, that you need to rapidly get a good team around you and make sure that your failings are the strengths in your team. So I know my weaknesses and my strengths, and I make sure that the team of people that I surround myself with complement that and mitigate for that. So there'll be other people in there who've got weaknesses that my strengths complement, if you know what I mean. And I'm not afraid to sort of get a team of people together and say, between us we'll come up with a good idea, but one person in this room is not going to be the expert at it. Sure. So yeah, I think that sense of isolation and not being able to network straight away, finding your feet and gaining confidence and dealing with issues gives you that over time.
Absolutely. It's hard, isn't it? Because I think as human beings, we naturally do that, don't they? Because from a young age, we look up at our parents, like we expect them to have all the answers. We go into school, we expect the teachers to have the answers. You work in a brand new company, you expect the directors to have the answers. And we're always in that cycle. But when you finally get to the point and you realize you don't have all the answers and everyone's looking at you for the answers, it's quite a surreal feeling, isn't it? And it's almost a bit like in a bit of a twilight zone, because you don't know who to go to now. And it's a bit of an incredible epiphany in some respects, because you realize that everyone that you looked up to might not have had the answers, and they're probably winging it. And most of the time we probably are winging it, aren't we, in some respects, because you're just trying to do the best you can. I
think that point that you've just made about doing the best you can is important, because I think if ever I'm kind of struggling to make a decision, I think it's less winging it and more focusing it. So I always focus, if I'm ever struggling, I just say to the team, right, what's our core purpose? Our core purpose is children. And suddenly, if you're focusing on children and you think, what is the best thing for these children? The answers kind of evolve themselves. If you're thinking, oh, what about this person looking in? What about that person looking in? And you're looking at external pressures, it can cloud your thinking. But if you just stop all of that white noise and you focus it back down on what is the best thing for these children, it's not always the most popular decision. It doesn't always win you the most popularity, but actually it's usually the most ethical and the thing that has the most integrity that you end up doing. And that's what we try and do anyway.
Yeah, of course. How difficult was it when you went into your second headship, into the current role you're in now? And obviously, I think naturally people dislike change, don't they? So when you've come in with your ideas and tried to implement your strategies, how difficult was it to try and get your staff on board?
Well, actually, I think I was onto a winner straight away, because the school had been through such a turbulent sort of 2, 3, 4 years before I got there, and was in such a state that I think anybody who was going to go there and have clear direction and invest in the staff there and the children was going to be onto a winner. But I don't have different ways of dealing with any. I'm just me, to be honest with you. So when I rocked up on the first day, I said, look, I've done this before. You do an offset in the next term or two. You can either come with me and I will show you that it will work, or I can help you find a job elsewhere. If you're not happy and you've been so unhappy and downtrodden here, I can help you. But I promise you, I've done this before. You can go and talk to my colleagues at my other school. And I sent them over there to see some of the things that we put into place, and they came back and reported back to the other colleagues. And we didn't magpieing. I sent them all out to other schools. They came back with ideas, and I said, I'm not going to change anything. The change is going to come from within. And I think at the start, people kind of are, the appeal is the human being who stands before you and says, look, there's nothing you can tell me that will shock me. I'm a woman who's been through a divorce. I've had a double mastectomy. I've got 2 children. I've done a degree. I've done a couple of master's degrees. I've done a doctorate. There's nothing you can tell me right now that will shock me, that will faze me in any way. If you come to me and you share any issues you've got with me, I can help you. My life is not, I don't think I'm stood here like the perfect finished article. And I think sharing the fact that you're just a normal human being, that's the initial appeal. And I think following that is proving to people that what you say is what you mean. So those relationships are absolutely key. So I introduced myself personally to every single member, 90 members of staff. We had a conversation in my room. I got to know them, their families, what their issues might be about school. And they all kind of tumbled out. People were scared to come into the office. Stood at the threshold, terrified to come in, didn't want to raise, any ideas or suggestions. And all of that just took time and trust. And then each decision I made, I knew that people were looking at me for what was the basis for that decision. And I think it's easy perhaps to lead a school that's in a good place. The difficulty comes from trying to lead a school through a very challenging situation. However, the benefits of that, you can't buy the level of trust and respect from your colleagues and from the parents and the children. Once you start leading with integrity and you're making decisions that people see all the time, that's when people buy into you. So did I have a tough time? No, I didn't. I knew it would be a challenge, and it was a challenge, but I loved it, and I absolutely love it now. And everybody in my school knows that I'm about the team, and if any of them, we get new staff coming in, and it's about the team. That is all it is. 100%. Everyone works together for one another, and we look out for one another to protect the integrity of our school.
Yeah, absolutely. It must be really difficult going into a school that's not doing so well. I mean, as a parent, you wouldn't want your children to go to a school that's not good. I mean, you want them to go to good schools, don't you, naturally? And obviously, you've got to try and create this vision, and you've got to go in. And it's quite remarkable to be able to come out the other side and say you've pulled a school out of the deep end, and you've got it up to where you've got to, And I think it's much easier to work in an outstanding school where everything's in place, but to actually transform a school, I mean, that's a massive challenge, isn't it? It's a project, isn't it? I mean, I actually say in recruitment, the good recruiters anyone can do well in a good market, but the really good recruiters do well in a bad market. And would you say it's quite similar with teaching? Like, teachers can go work in a good school, in an outstanding school, but we'll find it that much more difficult when they're in a tougher school, and those ones will actually stand out more.
I don't know, I think you can look at it from both perspectives, because I worked in an outstanding school, and I think that the worry then is that you're going to dip, that at some point you won't be outstanding anymore. So the pressures are the same. And in the outstanding school that I worked in, a lot of the parents exercised pressure because the expectation was that the school would be outstanding and that their children were going there. They're very wealthy, affluent parents, and it's in a lovely area. So I think the pressures are still there no matter what school you're in. And we're all under pressure from the government, from Ofsted and so on. What I think the benefits are of working in a school that's got challenges is that you can really build resilience. Your resilience has to come, otherwise you literally fall to pieces emotionally. If you haven't got the resilience and it doesn't come, and you're not supported by people who are helping you develop that resilience, it can be terrible. It can be really damaging. So I think for me, I've got endless pots of resilience throughout my childhood, throughout my life, my personal life. I've developed that resilience, and it just comes to the fore in my work life. So I don't have an issue with being resilient or with seeing that other people need to develop it, and I will actively help them to do that. And the beauty for me of working in challenging schools is that I can help other people not fall to pieces, to get to do the job that they love to do, and to turn it around, not for kudos or anything. People say to me, oh, you're going to be a superhead. I'm like, no, I don't want to be a superhead. I want to stay here. Oh, don't you want to head up a multi-academy trust? No, I don't want to head up a multi-academy trust. I love my school here. Thank you. No, I don't want to be held up as some superhead or wonder person. I just want to do the best possible job I can do for my staff, my children, and the pupils at my school. And I'm proud to do that. And, you know, if that involves me, you know, taking the hit on certain things, you know, I knew when Ofsted came in, I knew that the school wasn't ready. I'd only been there 2 terms. I knew we were not ready to get the good. It had an RI before. I'd been there 2 terms. The Ofsted inspector said, argue with me to make this good. You know, you're on the brink, you're on the cusp, argue with me. And I said, I don't want that, because it's I'm early here in my headship. And I think if I argue with you, I could argue really well and provide evidence that the school is virtually good. So you'll give us a good, and then what happens? All the support that we could get will dry up. So what's the point? I then leave myself very, very vulnerable. So it was risky, but I told all the parents that that's the position that we were in, and that's it. I think communication and relationships are key. So all the parents knew. The report itself, the narrative, was very, very, very complimentary and good about all the staff in the school. It highlighted a few things that we knew we still needed to work on, but none of it was a surprise to anybody, parents, local authority, staff, nobody. And we've just worked really hard. And the shame of it is, of course, lockdown and COVID kind of put a little hurdle in the way for that. But, you know, we carry on, and hopefully at some point the hard work will be recognised outside as it's recognised inside.
Absolutely. I think we'll come on to COVID in a second, but obviously with something that you spoke about, I think just before I go on to that, I mean, one thing I really like about you, and obviously it's the first time we're speaking, isn't it? But one thing I really like about you is it's a similar trait that some of the best teachers and educators have, and through my experience, it's that ability to I think with you in particular, because you probably had a more difficult childhood, like you want to make that difference like your teachers did to you, and that passion oozes out of you, like it's so infectious, and that's probably what's made you like progress and have that love for children and wanting to make that difference. And you didn't have to say it, but it comes across like really well. Obviously you mentioned about being resilient, and I think it's incredible because this year we talk about resilience, like the teaching profession has had to be resilient, haven't they? And how difficult has it been, A, to be a teacher, but B, to be a head teacher running a school with in the midst of COVID this year?
Well, it's been incredibly difficult. Not because of what goes on in school, interestingly, but because of what goes on outside of school. So again, like I said earlier, whenever I am making a really challenging decision, I always bring it back to the children. So what's in the best interest of the children in our school? And the lockdown and the way we handled the lockdown and the way we tried to calm down parents, because this rhetoric outside in the press, it's constant about lost learning and this detrimental impact of it in terms of learning is largely a nonsense. It's only lost because we measure it. So if we're measuring something, and the measuring tools are basically government instruments to judge schools anyway, so if we're measuring it, then you can say, well, they haven't quite reached the standard that government say they should have reached. But lots of children got a lot out of lockdown that wasn't formalized and testable and so on. You know, you only had to look at the Twitter feed or, you know, people's Facebook threads or whatever to see that children were baking with their parents and walking every day and enjoying the weather and spending time with their family, that because of the way our society is configured, they weren't doing before. Now, obviously, there are vulnerable children in our country. I would have been one of those vulnerable children when I was a child, 100%. So yes, of course, you know, I was not phased to keep school open for those vulnerable children because someone has to keep them safe. And again, the way our society is focused on capitalism and money means that a lot of the funding for services that support vulnerable children has dried up, all but dried up. Mental health services, social services, any kind of structure in our society that helps those who are vulnerable or marginalized has almost gone. It's almost been denuded because of the way the government funds it. So of course schools are at the heart of protecting children and families. We always have been. The only thing is that the media suddenly realized that was the case. When schools were open for the vulnerable, when we were feeding vulnerable families, and there was a huge outpouring of support for us saying, wow, we didn't know. We didn't know that there were so many hungry families. We didn't know there were so many families who didn't have access to computers or you know, devices or whatever. We thought everyone was as lucky as we are, and that's not the case. The tide has obviously turned. inevitably. We can talk about that later, but how difficult has it been? It's been incredibly difficult because of the media, because of the government and the media and the way they've portrayed us and not supported us. Our job has been made a lot more difficult than it needed to be. No teacher that I know has resented going in holidays, the Whit holiday, the Easter holiday. Some people even worked in the summer holiday. We've all worked. I've worked every weekend and every night since all this nonsense began, as have my colleagues, with very, very few bits of time off. And that's because always at the back of your mind, you're concerned not just about the academic, development of children, but their social and emotional well-being is 100% at the forefront of everything we do. Coming back after the summer, of course, the stupidity around insisting that Ofsted continue to do inspections at whatever level, whatever they're being labelled as, they're still inspections. That's recently stopped simply because of a national lockdown. But the insistence on continuing to do tests, what are you testing? What is being tested by testing children in a couple of weeks with phonics? The teachers already know what they need to do. They're working on it. They've known since September when we assessed all the children when they came back. So this whole idea of national testing, that regime being reinstated, is nonsense. Because children, in my school, we've managed, touch wood, to avoid any kind of bubble closures and year groups going home. But not all schools can say that. Some schools have closed several times, several bubbles. How is it appropriate then to assess children who have had disrupted learning before the summer, disrupted learning this term? What's the purpose? It's not helping children, is it? So, the government and the way they behave and the policymakers, to me, there's such a disconnect between reality and what goes on down at Whitehall and all these policies that they insist have to happen because they're not necessary, quite honestly. They're just ridiculous. So it's been made really difficult. But by and large, most parents, the vast majority, have been extremely supportive and very grateful to the way that schools have operated. Of course, you're always going to have a handful who have their own agenda or their own anxieties and that they take them out on you. And, it's not easy. People are losing their jobs. With the threat of loss of job and loss of income comes loss of home. It's a very challenging time. The economy is being affected. Will they get another job? Who knows? So there's a lot of anxieties that people are having to suffer at home that isn't just around educating their child. They're trying to maintain a house for their child or feed their child. So really, the pressure that we would exert on them to teach at home or to learn at home is quite challenging for them in some circumstances. So has it been easy? No. But I'm very lucky, aren't I? I have a job I love. Although I don't do my normal job and I'm not in and out of classrooms every day because of this bubble thing, and I can't, transference of the disease if it comes in, a virus if it comes into our school and so on. I can't do that, what I would normally do. But I stand on the gate every morning and every evening. Today notwithstanding because I'm writing the head teacher's report, but I'm there still smiling behind my mask, greeting everybody every day, checking in on them, and I'm lucky. That's a lucky place to be. I actually had the virus in April. I was seriously ill for about 5 weeks. And so I count myself lucky on many levels. And it hasn't been easy, but we're still here smiling now.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, you raised quite a few points there. I mean, let's just go on to obviously how the media and the government has kind of portrayed the profession, because ultimately this is the biggest reason I'm doing this podcast, is to create awareness for everything teachers are doing and school staff are doing for our economy. Because ultimately the media, I had a friend a few weeks ago that said, what are teachers complaining about? They've been off for the last 7 months, and it's hardly been the case. And unfortunately, that comes from like the media, that comes from like hearing about it, and like, what do you think is wrong with them? Like, why do the media do that? Why are the media and the government portraying the teaching profession in the way it is, and why is it so underappreciated and undervalued?
Why? Gosh, that's quite an existential question. I would say at times, and this is a bit of a political statement, so again, I might not be the best person to ask because it could be quite contentious, but I think at times the government kind of spin doctors get very busy and they use little snippets and stories to try and hide what's really going on. down in Downing Street or whatever. So I think it's easy to break news about lazy teachers who don't want to work, who are being paid for doing nothing, when other things are going on in the background. You know, when the likes of Dominic Cummings are clearly breaking the rules and travelling the length of the country, you will throw anything out there to try and hide what's going on as a smokescreen. And I think that's a tactic that's been used many generations over in the press. It's just a shame that at a time of international and national crises, that there isn't more support going on, and that there is a lot of that kind of smoke and mirrors type behaviour going on. In terms of systemic disrespect for our profession, I think that's come in because they've tried to compartmentalise and commodify education over time. It's a thing that, and again, this was in my doctoral thesis. 40 odd years ago, when Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan tried to come up with this idea that education could be put into neat parcels that children would access all at the same level, and it was up to them if they were going to do it or not. Never mind the fact they might have a special need or come from, a very challenging background. It was placed on the individual. This neoliberal idea that if you can't access it, then it's tough on you and it's your fault. It is completely unfair, because actually everybody, particularly now, the financial situation of our country does not access education in the same way. There are hungry, traumatized children coming to school in the morning who will not sit there and want to talk about maths or learn about reading, because they're too busy thinking about what's happened at home or not happened at home to be able to access that. And I think it's a real shame that in the last 40 years, education has been kind of slowly eroded into being something that's unionist and unionized, and anyone who complains about what the government want to do suddenly is labeled as somebody subversive or an unpleasant character, someone who's being paid for doing nothing. I can tell you now, no teacher that I know has not been anxious about children, and even when they've had to stay home, maybe they've been shielding or isolating, they are still in regular contact with me or their colleagues. They're still, communicating via Twitter with their classes, because all teachers, bar none that I've met, even those who aren't the best at doing their job for whatever reason, but all teachers have got a passion and a care for the children that they look after. So to have any one of us portrayed in the press as being lazy is, it absolutely beggars belief. And I think it's because people need someone to blame. And what also has come to the fore is how essential schools are in order for the country to work. So not only do we pick up all of the things that the services that have disappeared do, so mental health, childhood obesity, teaching children to read. Back in the day, my mum taught me to read, and I come from a really challenging background. My mum taught me to read because that's what happened, back in the day. Now everything has to happen in school, from teaching about, what did Amanda Spielman say the other day? Children have lost the ability to eat with a knife and fork. I mean, my mind was nearly blown. I thought, this is the thing that you're worried about? This, not eating with a knife and fork, my life. And that's a woman who heads up Ofsted. So I think we're now expected to teach children to eat with a knife and fork, that look after their bodily and mental health. The mental health thing is massive. We're meant to look after them in terms of their physical safety, because their families are hurting or harming or placing them in danger, as well as teach them maths and English. That will be tested in a couple of months, as well as teach them phonics. That's going to be tested, as well as actually allow their parents to go to work. So never mind the fact that the government guidance says children are meant to self-isolate if they display symptoms, and so are staff. What about the fact that their families don't want them to be at home with them because they need to work to actually earn a living? The whole thing has not been handled at all well to support us as a profession or our reputation. And it could have been very easily done in a completely different way by one thing, and that is asking those people who are actually doing the job to give the ideas. Instead, they rely on people like Michael Wilshaw. So Michael Wilshaw, who was Ofsted lead about, diddly-do years ago, he is so out of touch with reality that it's not even true. So we'll ask him, or we'll ask some of our mates who run the Academy Trust that we want, that we like, and we won't ask anybody who's really doing the real job, who could really help us do it better. And that is the problem. It's about communication and about being disconnected from reality.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I spoke to Phil Sharrock. He's actually coming out this Friday. Definitely watch him. He's very political. He is, and I'm sure he's going to rock some feathers. But he's really interesting because one of the things that he believes, and we had this conversation about Gavin Williamson, who's obviously not really. To be honest with you, I don't know what he's done in the last year really for education. I mean, I don't see him tweeting. I don't see him online. I don't really know what he's doing. And we were having this conversation, and Phil kind of mentioned that there should be one union, and that kind of results in looking after the decisions that are made within the profession, opposed to people in Downing Street like trying to run a school in the rural parts of, I don't know, Cambridge. I mean, they don't know. You can't generalize schools in London or just in one, like the whole of England, like just in the same way, can you? And
I think that's the problem. You've hit the nail on the head. You can't generalize. You can't generalize schools, and you can't generalize children, and nor can you compare children in one year to the next year, because each and every child is individual. Each and every school is individual. It serves a different community. But what the government have tried to do when they've tried to commodify it, and not just this government, successive governments of the last 40 years, is they've tried to make a way of measuring output that makes it everyone the same, and no one is the same. No one is the same. So it makes a mockery of everything that you're about. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
I don't know if I'm explaining that really well at all, but these ideas of generalizations are utterly ridiculous, and successive secretaries of state for education have simply wanted to make a name for themselves. The end. And they've based it on their expertise in education because they went to school. I went round Asda shopping the other day. That doesn't make me an expert in marketing and in running a supermarket. And that's the level of input that these guys have had in and with education. I went to school 30 years ago, so I'm going to tell you how our school should be best run. Said nobody ever, apart from the people who are in power.
I mean, what more support can they give? I mean, obviously, I understand. Just going on to that, actually, sorry, just before I go on, you've obviously kind of said you can't generalize, but how difficult is it going to be, and how much manpower are you going to need to be able to tailor the curriculum to each area or each individual school? I mean, how difficult is it going to be to kind of monitor and track?
Why do you need to? Who needs to, and why does it need to be done?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I understand that. I think it's quite. I mean, that's a fair point, to be honest with you. Like, why do you need to? But ultimately, I think with anyone that would argue the point is, and I mean, it's me being devil's advocate here. I mean, it's not me arguing against you, but the argument is when people are going for jobs and you want to assess where people are at and what they're good at, and ultimately, if somebody's got really good maths, like how do you demonstrate that on your CV if you're applying for jobs when you come out of school, and how do you get into the better universities? I mean, in some respects, you kind of would need a grading system in some way to kind of be able to get places in life, right? So what can we do?
Well, I think that's perhaps appropriate for secondary age children. I'm not arguing against testing children. I'm not arguing against sort of achieving certification. Here I am sitting here with 2 masters and a doctorate. Of course, I'm not against achieving kind of recognition for the work that you've put in. But I think when children are 4 years old, do they need to be tested? I don't know. For whose benefit is that? When they're 7 years old, for whose benefit? When they're 11, for whose benefit? No one is benefiting. It's not an indicator of success. And I tell you how it isn't an indicator of success, because I wasn't tested when I was 4, nor was I tested at 7 for my times tables. I wasn't tested with SATs when I was 11. However, here I sit, perfectly successful, well-rounded individual, happy in my life, but I didn't have any of that. So it's clearly possible for people to live without being tested to death in their primary years.
Sure.
I had GCSEs and A-levels. I didn't do particularly well with either. I did okay. I did well enough because I was working as well, because I had a difficult home life. So I wasn't 100% invested in education and academia. I was a rounded person. I did a lot of sport and I did a lot of paid work, because that's how my life was. That doesn't mean I don't have any potential. I got a first in one of my master's degrees. So it's like what you're measuring and for who. It doesn't really Nobody knows that you get a first in your master's degree. No one knows, only you. You don't put it on anything other than a CV. And what does it really signify anyway? The fact is, which is what I've said to my daughter actually, who's 16 and going through her GCSEs this year, you know, all a doctorate does, it doesn't tell people that you're clever. It tells people that you are relentless, because a doctorate is like a marathon. There are times when you want to give up because it is hard work, but it doesn't involve any more or less intelligence than doing A-levels or than doing a master's degree or an undergraduate degree. It just involves you being, when it's difficult, forcing yourself to carry on. Does that make sense? Because it's the same skill set. You're just putting information together. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, how would you kind of go about kind of measuring the success of a school, or how should we not necessarily assess children, but I mean, obviously, I think not every head teacher's like you, right? I mean, not every teacher's like you, but there kind of needs to be some way that we assess if children are progressing, because we need to make sure that they are progressing in schools, right? Otherwise, what's the point of them being there? Like, we want to set them up for life. So how can we measure that? How can we measure that we're making the right progress for these children?
Well, so again, I say, for whose benefit? So, for example, of course, all of my infant children have been assessed by their teachers, by people that know and like them and who they're familiar with, for where they are in phonics, because I'm not a fool. I know that phonics are the building blocks to learning to read, and that is the key to success in life, being able to read and access information. So when my teachers do that, it's not so that we can put ourselves up there at the top of a league table with all the local schools and say, well, we've got the best phonics results, we're obviously the best teachers here, we're the best school. It's so that we can say, okay, this group of children requires input on this, and this group of children requires that. That group's ready to start reading books. That is where we assess. So if you were to come and visit my school, or if an Ofsted inspector was to come and visit my school and say, so how are you getting on with your phonics? Be like, yeah, brilliant. All the children have been assessed. They're all being taught age appropriately, ability appropriately, and they're making progress. What more needs to be done other than that? You know, do I need to publish that? Do all the parents in the whole country need to know that my phonics is up to scratch? Or is it enough that I'm a trusted, respected professional who's got many, many years under my belt, that my teachers have all been trained at least for 4 years? And this is the whole media rhetoric, the government rhetoric. We can't trust teachers to do their job. Therefore, we have to send Ofsted and we have to test the children to make sure the teachers are doing their job. Mm-hmm. It's not right. If we're testing children, that's not right. They're too young. If we're assessing them, and it's to help them progress and help them do better and help them develop, that's a different kettle of fish. And that doesn't need to be published in a league table, because each school is different and you cannot compare like for like at all. Not even the school around the corner from me is the same as my school, because my school's my school. It's a different building, different size, different groups of children. All the children in it are different. What I can do is look at one child and say, have you made progress from the start of the year? Yes is the answer, in which case I'm happy. I'm not against having curriculum. I'm not against having assessments. What I'm against is that those assessments are used to punish schools and to put them into a league table, which is fictitious because you can't compare like for like. We're not saying, has this factory produced 100 motor cars this year? Yes, it has. That one's produced 110, so clearly they're more efficient than this one. Children aren't motor cars. They're not, I don't know, parts for mixers or whatever. They're actual people who are affected by different things at different times and who learn at different rates.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite mind blowing, because I was speaking to John Tate. Obviously, I don't know if you saw that one, but he talks about the grading system in the UK, and obviously you're talking about kids that are from disadvantaged families or advantaged families or whatever. There's like this big generalisation, and each year they obviously work on a certain percentage. If you fall in the top 5% or something, you get a 9 or whatever, however it works, right? And but going back to what you said, like, how can you compare children that are from advantaged families with constant Wi-Fi, that have 3 hot meals a day, to children that have 1 meal a day, which is probably really at school, and have single parents that are working full-time jobs? And how can you compare those? And it should be a completely different grading system, shouldn't it? I mean, some kids in year 11 this year might get higher grades than the kids next year, but because they weren't in the top 5%, they will seem to be they'll have a lower grade. And I just, especially with everything that's gone on this year, I think that definitely needs to be looked at, because some kids have had to self-isolate for 2 weeks. They've only had one hot meal. They've had teachers self-isolated. How do you compare like children and generalize children all across the country with the same system? I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. I mean, from your point of view, like obviously you sound quite frustrated with like how the government have obviously played their cards this year. I mean, what would you expect more from the government?
Well, certainly, as I think I said before, if they were to ask people who are doing the job, I think, if they were to do a straw poll of every head teacher in the country, and they've got our email addresses, by the way, so it wouldn't be difficult. How many of you think it'd be useful to do the phonics screening check this year? I'm going to make a prediction right now. I'd bet my house on the fact that it would be minimal numbers that would think it would be beneficial. How many people think it'd be beneficial for children this year to do year 2 SATs, Key Stage 1 SATs? Is it beneficial? I'm going to predict that not many head teachers would think it was. And then what they should do is say, okay, all the millions that we would spend administering and marking and printing and sending out, posting out SAT papers, let's invest in actual children's learning. Let's not test them. Let's not invest the money in them being tested for our purposes, because it's not for helping them. Let's invest the money in teaching them, in teaching them. And if they were to divide out the money that they spend every year on testing and give it to schools, I bet you would see standards increase exponentially, because if we had the money to do what we needed to do, children would be taught brilliantly and they'd all be happy. And you know what? I'm an Army reservist. I don't know whether you know this from my profile on LinkedIn, but
yeah, I saw that, yeah.
And what they do in the Army now is they do something called role fitness tests. So in the past, people's physical aptitude was tested in a different way. Now they test you whether you're fit for the role that you are wanting to do. So obviously, I am not going to join the infantry. So I do not need to carry necessarily heavy loads over long distances, because that will not be my role in the Army. So in the future, we could have a situation where in our country, different jobs have a role assessment. So if you want to be an engineer, you could, sit an engineering test which says, are you suitable? Can you be trained to be an engineer? Do you have the requisite skills? You don't have to be tested necessarily in school to do that. Mm-hmm. Of course you can be, but wouldn't it be interesting if we switched it around and said, when you're ready to do a job, do you have the skills necessary? If not, then you can't do that job, but there are other jobs that you can do. It would involve a massive shift in thinking on a societal level. So I realize it's probably quite blue sky thinking, but it feels like it might be another layer of common sense to reduce this idea of, I did GCSEs. They are different to the ones that my daughter's doing because they're graded differently. Is my A grade in French different to her A grade in Spanish? She hasn't got an A grade in Spanish. They've got a 9. So is a 9 different to an A? Now they've got A star, 9 star plus. Is a 9 star plus better than an A plus? How do we know who's better, who's more qualified? Nothing is comparable because everything is always changing. So what you perhaps need is, at the point that you want to do a particular job, shouldn't you be assessed for whether you are either able to do that job straight away or if you've got the potential to be? So again, for example, the Army will assess me shortly about whether they think I've got the requisite skills to be able to be trained to be an officer in the reserves. So they're not assessing if I'm an officer, they're assessing if I can be trained to be an officer. So for whatever job a person does, they could be assessed about their potential to do a job. So it's not unprecedented, is it?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? If you want to be a bus driver, let's assess whether you're able to, have the skills to be a bus driver. If you know what I mean? If you want to be a plumber, have you got the skills and the physical attributes needed to be a plumber? Let's test the potential at the point of when you decide that's what you want to do. Education should be about throwing yourself in, immersing yourself in as much as you can. And if you want to test yourself along the way, great. But the tests that get done should be about development and progression. And they don't need to be used as a punishment tool for your school that you attend, which is what they are used for now.
Absolutely. And I think that ultimately the job of teachers and schools is to provide a safe haven for some of these kids, and B, to help them to get somewhere in life and make something of themselves, and kind of like push them down the right path almost, right? And do everything you can. I mean, there's only so much you can do. You can only take the horse to the lake. You can't make the horse drink the water, right? And you obviously, your duties as a teacher is just to try to do the best you can for these kids. It's like, it's very difficult, isn't it? With everything that's going on. Like, do you think with like, what are your views on the union at the moment? Obviously, they wanted to keep the schools closed, didn't they, over lockdown? I mean, would you agree with that? Did you want to close down?
I don't know if they necessarily wanted to keep schools closed over the lockdown. I think they've never deviated, well, particularly not my union anyway. I've never deviated from the fact that we understand our role, like you've just said, even though I dispute this because I think there should be other structures in place in society. Our role is to provide a safe haven for children. And that is sad, because when school becomes a safer place than your home, I feel like that something is wrong with society. But, you know, unions have always known that and never deviated from the fact that they know that the schools need to be open. However, what they've asked for and not been told the answer to thus far is what everybody else should be asking for, which is the evidence. All of our decision making about this pandemic, we have been told by the government at successive press conferences, this is all based on evidence. However, the evidence has never come forth. What we have had is conflicting evidence from alternative SAGE, different medical experts around the world saying, no, that's not how it needs to be. We've had comparisons with other countries who have done things better and in a different way. And no one's ever really given us the evidence. For example, at the start, we were told masks aren't necessary. Now we're being told they absolutely are necessary in and around school. If we had the evidence, then we'd all feel much more confident, wouldn't we? We were told that children couldn't get it, but they do get it. We were told they couldn't be carriers. They are carriers. So everything we've kind of been told over time has been proven to be nonsense. So when they were making their assertions at the start, and bearing in mind this was an international situation, an international crisis, when the decisions were being shared at the start, there was no guidance that said children or teachers and staff at school were going to be safe. Everyone else had to stay home. Everyone had to stay home and not go out. You were allowed out one hour a day or something, but teachers, no, they could go in. They were invincible, and children also invincible, because better that they're in school than in the home. That, to me, you're then making a judgment, aren't you? You're making a comparison of your life is more safe if you go to school than it is if you're in your own home with your family. Mm-hmm. There's something broken in your society, and you're then making a judgment of, teachers and people who work in schools, their lives are not as important as other lives because we need to keep our country going. And that was the thing that was kind of glossed over with teachers are lazy, they don't want to go to school. No. Everybody understands we need to go to school, but what we want to know is how do we keep everyone safe? Because I didn't feel comfortable at the start. There's health and safety legislation there. It's been there for decades that says you have to make your workplace safe. Otherwise, you're liable. I didn't feel comfortable making people go to work until I knew on the basis of what's this, what is the safety rules here? And all the unions were trying to do was to get the government to fess up with what these decisions are being based on, and they wouldn't tell the truth. The decisions were based on economics, plain and simple. That's fine, but then acknowledge that. The reason they won't acknowledge it is if the school staff started to die, they would then be liable to pay out to their families because they've put people at risk knowingly to keep the economy going. And I think really what people want is honesty, and we've not seen honesty at any time throughout this entire debacle. And no one's seen anything that's honest. And that's a real shame.
Absolutely. I think it's really disheartening. Even for me, obviously, I work in education recruitment. My business relies on schools being open. And look, that's besides the point. But what I'm trying to get at is I've been constantly keeping up with the news and trying to make sure that things are going to go back to normal. And the problem is the government have changed their story so many times. I mean, every 2 weeks, 2 months, there's something new, isn't there? And like my sister, she's an assistant head, and she talks about if her finding out what the public finds out at the same time, you're literally transform the school into a safe place within 24 hours with some of the new policies that come out. I mean, the latest policy came out on a Friday night, didn't it? And you've got the weekend to...
Yep. And for primary schools, it came out on a Wednesday lunchtime, and it had to be implemented by the following day, which was the lockdown, which meant that me and my senior leadership team were up till 1 o'clock in the morning, making sure that we had everything in place for the following day. It's unacceptable because they knew that they were going to do a lockdown the weekend before. They'd stupidly leaked it to the press as if we all didn't know, because who does that? Yeah. You know, if you apply the same logic and the same judgment that Ofsted would produce to a school onto the government, they would be absolutely in special measures, because then their communication is shocking, their engagement is shocking, they're not basing anything on research or facts at all, they're buckshotting it left, right and centre. There's nobody within any integrity, and how can they have any integrity when the Prime Minister of the country perpetuated lies and smoke and mirrors to try and protect an aid? The minute that happened, everybody's belief, even staunch people who are conservative, and I'm apolitical, even staunch conservative voters questioned what on earth was going on, because it was evident that he placed himself and other people at risk when everyone else was told not to leave their homes. So, but it was okay for him, which then opened the floodgates, and now here we are, you know, further down the line, and nobody, you know, where I live in the northwest of England, I walked to school the other day thinking the place would be silent, and it was business as usual. I expected roads to be empty. Everybody's just going about their business, but on furlough.
On furlough, yeah. It's insane, isn't it? Obviously, it's been an absolute nightmare, and like obviously I said earlier, the teachers have been so resilient this year, and they've been working so hard. I mean, you've been in half terms and the holidays, and you've been working extra long hours. You're trying to make things come into tuition in terms of like fit the sort of policies and the legislations that the government have put in. I mean, it's a really difficult one for teachers at the moment, because you're doing so much hard work and then you're getting this really bad press about the profession. What's like kind of keeping you motivated during these times?
Children.
Yeah, and this is it, isn't it? And teachers are superheroes, because they're making sacrifices. My sister doesn't come to our house because she doesn't want to pass anything on to our parents. You're obviously going in, you're working with children that are potentially got COVID, or you could at any point get COVID, and it's extraordinary, like what teachers have done this year. And obviously we speak a lot about the NHS, but we don't talk enough about teachers. What do the media need to understand? Like, what can we say to people that are watching to make them understand what teachers have been doing this year, and why it's unacceptable for the media to portray like the profession in the way it has?
I think it needs high-profile people who currently are just, I don't know, extensions of the government, to actually get some integrity and to stand up publicly instead of saying things like teachers are lazy and schools are rubbish. I mean, Andrew Adonis said that schools have not been, doing a good job and so on. And I think, again, so detached from reality, but nevertheless big voices that the press want to interview and know what their views are. And, you know, a lot of the press are steered by the government. Unfortunately, they're a political arm of what should be much more open and transparent and free. They're not. They're just a political tool, really. And it is a shame. But nobody really wants to hear about what teachers do. They grumble when their child isn't at school, but they don't want to know all the things that people do. And I don't speak about my parents there, but the parents at my school are brilliant, by and large. You know, obviously, as I say, there's one or two, but they see it. They see us every day smiling. We've had emails, tweets, messages, letters, parcels dropped in saying every day you're smiling, every day you're at the gate, no matter what. You look tired, have this, here's some tea, here's boxes of sweets and tea and coffee, and just a thank you. And by and large, they are all lovely, because it takes effort to say thanks, doesn't it? It does take effort. And it takes even more effort to go out and buy little treats that keep everyone going, but they matter, and they can see it. They see what we do and that we're trying to be normal, and we're constantly sharing what's going on. And I think they probably look at us and think, wow, those guys are really working hard on behalf of our children. And you're never going to please all the people all the time. I know that, but by and large, I think they get it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this misconception that teachers are almost like robots, don't they? Like they think that you kind of get told what to do by the government, and boom, you just get on with it, and like you teach 30 kids at a time, and they just learn wonderfully and blossom in their lives. But it's not the case. It's a lot of hard work, isn't it? I mean, it's really difficult. And you know what? Ultimately, this is why I'm doing this, and it's to say thank you to teachers, because they're working extremely hard, and it's so frustrating for me being in the industry to hear certain things about teachers, and this is what triggered this podcast in some respects, is to hear things about teachers when I know, like, some of the teachers I work with are working so hard. Like my sister is working 12 hours a day and the weekend sometimes, and it's insane, and it's the future of our economy depends on teachers and schools, and like these are talking about the next prime ministers, the next doctors. Like the future of our economy depends on these kids, and we need education more than ever, especially because, I mean, I think COVID has more than anything highlighted the difference between the disadvantage and the advantage, opposed to actually create it, which I think sometimes people have this misconception that it's done. But it's crazy, like, to think, because I've got Wi-Fi, I've got 3 hot meals a day, and for me it's just normal. But to think there's kids out there that are literally the only meal in the day is at school, and like schools are providing this safe haven. And like you said, we got to look at the economy for how can we let that happen in a first world country? How can there be starving children and children without internet and access to be able to learn and do work? It's phenomenal. I mean, it's really difficult because there's no real answer, is there? I mean, some people will have certain views, some people have other views. I think a generalized union like that can speak on behalf of education would be a massive step in the right direction. I don't know if that would actually happen. I feel like unions sometimes have different views within themselves, and politicians almost use that against the education sector and kind of play against each other, which is a little bit frustrating to watch. I mean, more than ever, we need teachers in the industry, though, don't we? And like, it's got such a bad press, but why is it that much more crucial that we get teachers in the industry and in the profession?
I think you've said it really. I think how it escapes the general public the importance of our role in terms of teeing people up to do crucial jobs in society is beyond me. How they can't see that without schools and without good education and without positive educational experiences, children will not be plumbers of the future and electricians of the future and local MPs or doctors or dentists. Where do they think those people come from? They don't wake up at 25 years old as a GP. They don't suddenly wake up at 30 as a head teacher. They have to start somewhere. And those building blocks are built when they start school. So for anybody who doesn't see the importance and the value of an education system, really, it beggars belief for me. I am speechless when everyone thinks, oh yeah, schools are rubbish. Why would you think that? It makes no logical sense whatsoever. And I think that I don't know how you change that. I feel like that's a systemic issue. And I think that it would have to come from, people showing respect. I mean, the simple idea that one footballer can change the way people think about hunger in our country. Again, I sit and think about humanity. I mean, I know Phil through LinkedIn and through Twitter, and we had a little game of political tennis, at the start of lockdown, where we did videos together where what we thought should happen in education, and he and I share similar views. And I think our society is probably broken, and how people view education is a reflection of that. And again, I say again, how it can be okay and acceptable and kind of brushed over that there are homeless people, that there are children who are safer in school than actually with their families, how there are no services to help with that. Why should that be a school thing? Why should it be teachers who have to look after children who aren't safe at home or feed them because they're not fed properly? That's a societal issue. That's an indicator of the health of our society. And I think the sad truth of it all is, why would any young person want to go into a profession where they know already that there'll be no respect. Pay is minimal for what you do. You might always have a job. That's the one good thing, absolutely positive thing. And you do get some holidays, but you're normally so exhausted and you have to work the holidays anyway that they are irrelevant. And your holidays, people say you pay for your holidays. We're not paid for the overtime. And also our pay is for the working weeks, which is 39 weeks a year, and is spread out across the 12 months as a salary. So we're not actually paid for the holidays if you look at it from one perspective, but we are from a different perspective. So why would anybody want to do that? For what? For no respect, for children who are in some cases needy and are not supported because the local authorities don't have the money to support them, for families who may or may not value what you do. I don't know. So it's important because there is no incentive to do it. So I think more importantly than ever, it needs to come from people, the enthusiasm of people like me who are plugging away every day, who have a great team of people who are plugging away every day, to sort of say to anybody who's interested, this is how it could be, which is why I take it very seriously when we have student teachers or volunteers who are thinking about going into teaching, newly qualified teachers, which is why I think the importance of coaching is huge, not just for early teachers, but for people who are interested in leadership roles. I coach all of my leaders because I want them to do well and I want them to be the future head teachers, because I'm not going to be around forever. And there are things that people can learn from me and from the mistakes I've made. So yeah, I think it's important because there is no incentive otherwise.
Absolutely. I mean, like, it's what can the government do to incentivize like graduates to get into teaching? Because I think that is a difficult one, isn't it? Because if you're a maths graduate, you're a science graduate, maybe an English graduate, you're not going to go into university thinking I'm going to do a degree and become a teacher, are you? Because you're probably going to get money in another profession. Like
a lot more money.
What do the government need to do to encourage people to get into teaching? Because they need to do something. There needs to be new strategies in place to get people into teaching, right? I mean, there's a massive difference.
I think it's a bit wider than teaching, if I'm honest with you. I think any public sector worker, so for me, I feel like teachers or anybody in the education sector, anybody in policing, anybody in the fire service, and anybody in healthcare, their salaries are minimal compared to the work that they do and the essential tasks that they perform for society. Now, part of it, yes, is a vocation, but that shouldn't mean that just because it's a vocational job that you shouldn't be paid, a kind of incentivizing salary, because we'll always need police, we'll always need fire service, we'll always need medical personnel, and we'll always need educational personnel. So again, the respect for those areas of society is fairly minimal. It's only been recently through COVID that any respect for the NHS was given, and even then it's a token effort. If I'm honest with you, it's a token effort, isn't it? You know, the respect for the police, not there. And yet all four of those areas of our society that I think are so essential are underfunded, they are under-respected, they're badly represented in the press and in the public domain. In order to do any kind of training and retention and recruitment, it comes from this lack of money, because we're not given the money to do what we need to do, and yet we're still expected to perform. So, you know, I see it often on a local forum where people will be very sort of negative about the police in our area. However, they're the first people that you call if your bike is stolen or if your house is broken, you know. So you know, and how you know you have to sit for 4 hours and wait to have your foot x-rayed because you've got drunk and tripped over. You know, actually you're waiting for 4 hours because the NHS is not funded properly. There are far too many people in all areas of our society, because we're a capitalist society. There are far too many people in power who give contracts and give lucrative businesses to their mates, when actually they could be done far more cheaply, with far more innovation and far better outcomes if they were done in a more transparent way. That has been evidenced by the test and trace system. It's been evidenced throughout this entire situation to do with COVID. And again, all of this has come to the surface, and it's irrefutable. It's actually irrefutable. There's Edenred, the company that were asked and tasked to do vouchers for feeding children. The links are out there in the public domain, who they're linked to and whose family knows who, and so on and so forth. They were given an award this week for excellent work during COVID, Edenred. If I can tell you the number of man hours and the number of days my staff, and I can only speak for my staff, but it's out there in the public domain, who sat for hours trying to get vouchers for children for food. Hours and hours and hours and hours. And when the families went to the checkout to pay with these vouchers, they were refused. And when they waited until they were virtually starving, because we had to wait up for, there was a backlog and so on and so forth. The humiliation, the man hours wasted, the stress, the anxiety. That company was given an award this week. They were awarded the contract to produce food vouchers during COVID lockdown, and they were appalling. But they were given an award, and I think that exemplifies everything that is wrong with this entire situation. People like Marcus Rashford, who campaign on behalf of hungry children, you know, what's he had? You know, I'm not suggesting that he should have anything, but I'm just saying a company that failed on every level gets an award because they're a government-backed company and all their mates are running them, and the tender went out to them, and it wasn't transparently done. It was just given to their mates. And it was done poorly, but they've been given an award.
If it was the private sector, right, you'd look at kind of the government as the parent company almost, wouldn't you? And you'd look at like the fire, the police, the education and NHS as like sort of companies, subsidiaries of the parent company in some respects. And you kind of see that the system's failing, like the parent company's failing, like their subsidiaries, aren't they? And if it was the private sector, we'd be looking at it and thinking, well, I mean, they're going to probably go bust soon, you know, and like the way that they're operating, like it's remarkable because you're talking about four crucial sectors to sorry, the sun's got in my eyes. Bear me 1 second. Sorry, bear me. So it's remarkable that it's still under the government. I mean, you can't privatize because you need the money, don't you? I mean, what's the answer? Like, how can the public sector take control back and actually give it to people within the actual communities to run their sector?
I think privatization's got a lot to answer for, really. Again, the way the government have acted is fractured education. So you've got academies, you've got free schools, you know, the different funding streams that they can all access depending on which the government favour. I think it's appalling. I think education as a political tool needs to stop. It needs to become apolitical. The people in charge of education shouldn't be the education secretary. The people in charge of education should be a think tank of educated people who are interested and invested in research and education, not money. It shouldn't be based on money. It should be the thing that the most money is invested into because, as I've said earlier, and you rightly said, it's the future of our country. It's the future. Education. It's not, it's not song lyrics. It is real. And starving schools of money and starving local authorities of the ability to fund schools properly is totally unacceptable. But because it's a political tool and efficiency is key and squeezing more out of schools for less is the way forward, how can you squeeze more education out of a child, squeeze the child so that they can perform better in exams and then, we're happy with you? That's absolutely appalling as a premise upon which to build the nation's youth, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's remarkable, isn't it? I mean, for anybody that's doing their PGCE this year, obviously it's going through probably one of the most challenging years to do a PGCE, a teacher training. I mean, what advice would you have for them to help them get through this year?
The same as I've given to my son. He's just joined the Army College, and he's struggling with homesickness. And he says it's rubbish. It's not what I thought it would be. And I've said the same thing to him that I would say to anybody doing a teacher training course this year. This is not what you thought it would be. It's not. However, it will get better, and provided that you are supported through this year. And you are lucky if you get a school that is supportive of you, and I'm sure that there are many, many out there, then you will survive it, and then you will thrive when you get into your teaching career. And there are loads of people that you can seek solace from. There's a massive educational community on Twitter, and there's a huge educational community on LinkedIn as well, just perhaps not as accessible as on Twitter. And just find positive people. I mean, it's a mantra for life anyway, but the company that you keep can have a massive influence on you. And if you're struggling, I'll bet you that there'll be other people struggling as well. So reach out on Twitter, and you'll get the support that you need to get through this challenging year. And because that's how it is, isn't it? We're all struggling. Everyone's struggling in some way or the other, because it's not normal.
Exactly. Like I've obviously launched my own company last year, and this year, I mean, 4 months in, I mean, we went into a national lockdown. So I completely understand that this year's tough, and it's tough for especially those NQTs that done their PT last year, because they're having to retrain almost this year because they're having to forget everything they learned last year. But yeah, it's a difficult one, but it will get easier. I mean, you can look back in 10 years' time and look at any NQT that tells you it's difficult and say you know nothing compared to what I had to go through back in 2020, you know, and it's a difficult year, yes, but I mean, we need teachers, we need motivated teachers that want to make a difference to these kids. And it is really frustrating having an employer that maybe doesn't support you in the way that you should be supported in the education sector, but it's just as crucial that we get people in the industry to help these kids, you know, because the gap is getting bigger between the advantage and disadvantage. It's being highlighted more, but it is definitely growing. And we need people that are going to care about these kids and make a difference. Yeah, it's great if you become a teacher and you go straight into an outstanding school, but the kids that are in struggling schools are the ones that need the support the most, don't they? And I just really hope people kind of like take away from this podcast that you are making a difference to these kids' lives, and what teachers do are remarkable. Like we said earlier, you guys are a resilient bunch. To have to adapt to everything you've had to this year, I mean, it's been phenomenal, and it's a shame you don't get credit for everything you've done this year, because it's remarkable. Genuinely, I couldn't do what you've done this year. Genuinely, I could not have done it. I mean, I couldn't do the planning, the marketing, trying to keep up with the curriculum needs, to hit challenges, to adapt online. Oh, Jesus Christ, the list goes on, right? I mean, the constant changing to legislation, like, it's phenomenal what you guys have done. And I mean, I just want to thank all the teachers for everything they've done for this, and not just teachers, but school staff as well, for everything they've done for this country this year. And I just hope we get more people understanding what you guys are going through, and hopefully this podcast will help achieve that.
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, just before we kind of end it there, I mean, is there anything you'd like to add to everything that we've discussed?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think I've hidden my political views. I don't think I've hidden my ideas about assessment and league tables. I don't agree with them. And I don't think I could hide my passion for what I do, or the children that I work with, and the people I'm lucky enough to serve alongside. I think the public sector should be proud of everything they've done, because each and every one of us has worked under very challenging circumstances, and not been able to be furloughed, actually. We've had to continue to keep ticking over, and to keep people safe, and to keep things ticking over. And I think anybody who can sit and in all good conscience not see that is not my people, really. So yeah, I'm sure the majority of the country, the majority of sensible people in our country, will see the work that we've all done.
And just to kind of reiterate, like, you have saved certain kids' lives, you know, like as a sector, like, there's certain kids that probably wouldn't have made it this year if it wasn't for school staff and teaching staff. Like, you've been incredible. I mean, there's probably so many kids out there that owe you a massive debt, but I think as a country we owe you a massive debt. And I just hope more people recognise what you're doing for this country, because we wouldn't have been here without you, you know, and these kids wouldn't have been here without you. I mean, I've got nephew and nieces, and they wouldn't have been where they are without you, you know, and it's remarkable what you're doing. And obviously I can't thank you guys enough for everything you're doing. And I hope people understand that, you know, I really do. And I hope this podcast creates that awareness. So, I mean, thanks so much, Victoria, for coming on. I really appreciate it. I mean, you've had a phenomenal career, and obviously we've spoken quite a lot about your views and how frustrating it can be, like, sort of where you're at. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I mean, you've been absolutely brilliant, and I'm so glad you came on to share your views. They've been phenomenal, and I just hope people listen, you know.
Thank you. I get bored of my own voice, so let's hope no one else does.
I doubt it. You're a teacher. You can't be getting bored of your own voice.
I talk so much as a head, honestly. The last couple of weeks, talking, organising, sorting out, fixing. I'm so bored of myself. But I've got to get on with some writing. I've got the head teacher's report to governors to write, because normal business has to carry on. Never mind.
Absolutely.
Coding. Got the normal running of the school to carry on with. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
No worries. Thanks for coming on. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.